Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Before I come down.
Perfect.
Who's on the line?
This is Lynn.
Lynn. Okay,
yeah.
Thanks, Lynn.
On the line.
Yes.
As long as it is.
Yeah. All right, I'd like to call to order the planning and zoning meeting for July 9th, 2024. Time is 6 p.m. Can I get a roll call vote, please? Attendance, sorry.
Harmon,
Here.
Ritchie. Barris,
Here.
Workman. Here. Sucker,
Here.
Weiss,
Here.
Nate,
Here.
and Piper.
Here.
Thank you. All right, item 3A would be approval of the July 9th, 2024 agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to approve that?
So moved.
In a second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, same sign. All right, the minutes approval, so approval of the June 25th, 2024 meeting minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve that?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, same sign. Okay, we'll move on to public comment. This would be for anyone in the audience that's here to speak on an item that's not on the agenda. Do I have anyone here that for an item that's not related to the agenda?
May I ask a point of clarification?
Yes, so it's anything that's not listed on the agenda, public comments or concerns would be in this section.
Would be in this, when is the section for what's on the agenda?
Well, that would be covered in the old business and the new business, so
Thank you.
no problem. All right, then we'll move on to old business. 6A would be consideration and adoption of the urban chicken ordinance in the city of Indianola.
Okay, so I have some updates on the urban chicken ordinance. So the Community Development Department brought forth and presented the proposed urban chicken ordinance to the Planning and Zoning Commission at the last meeting, which was June 25th. And again, this proposed ordinance would allow urban chickens within city limits in all residential zoning districts as long as specific requirements were met. This includes permit requirements, enclosure requirements, land separation requirements, design criteria, and other regulations. After presenting the ordinance 2 weeks ago, the commission sent the ordinance back to staff for additional review, additions of amendments to the ordinance, and to allow for more community feedback before a decision was made and a recommendation was sent to the city council. Today, we are presenting the urban chicken ordinance again to update the board on the most recent survey results and to show the amendments that were made to this ordinance, along with further explanations on the code enforcement and permitting process. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the community survey. The public survey was made public on June 3rd and was shared through the City of Indianola's official website, along with the social media channels, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. The image above shows that the post has reached a little over 15,000 Facebook accounts, made over 17,000 Facebook impressions, and has received over 1,000 clicks directing users to the city website regarding the chicken ordinance. The graph right below it shows the analytics from the survey that shows how many responses we have been receiving since the survey was published. And as you can see, there was a big spike in responses when the survey was first published, but now there have just been a handful of responses trickling in since the first couple days. In addition to the city website and social media accounts, the public was initially informed through the Indianola Independent Advocate and the City of Indianola Community Update. At the last meeting, many comments were made about adding additional methods to increase awareness and accessibility to the information regarding the urban chicken ordinance and the survey. Since that meeting, staff has included information about the survey on the June 2024 Indianola Municipal Utility Statements, which would have been received around July 1st. And since then, the survey has received more responses, which I will talk a little bit more about now. So since this morning, there is a total of 1,234 responses. A little over 1,000 of those responses were specifically from participants who are residents of the city of Indianola. Again, the survey asked about perceived benefits, potential challenges, and overall thoughts of the proposed chicken ordinance. The survey was created to gain community feedback and to tailor parts of the ordinance to the wants of the community. And additionally, it was also talked about at the last meeting how the survey didn't seem accessible nor well advertised. And so as the previous slide stated, we added a couple ways for residents to be able to find the survey. So some of the survey results, similar to 2 weeks ago that I showed, was, again, as of this morning, 61.9% of residents who took the survey are in general support of having the urban chicken ordinance implemented in Indianola. And even though 61.9% of residents support the ordinance, only 44.4% are actually interested in owning, raising, and caring for chickens on their property. And again, these pie charts show that there are residents who support the ordinance, even though they have no personal interest in owning chickens themselves. And the survey also asked participants about the perceived benefits and the potential concerns of allowing urban chickens in Indianola. The pie chart on the right shows that 62.7% of residents who took the survey believe that urban chickens could bring benefits to the community. A majority of residents who took the survey strongly agreed that urban chickens provided the perceived benefits listed at the top of the screen. But at the same time, many residents were very concerned with the possible concerns and challenges on the screen as well. Negative impacts on property values and excessive noise were the two main concerns that were shown in the survey, with about 53% of survey participants indicating at least some level of concern about it. So based off of the results of the survey and the residents who took it, overall, there is a general support for implementing the chicken ordinance, but there are still concerns that need to be recognized. And the goal of this ordinance is to address those concerns by creating regulations and requirements that will help prevent any issues and nuisances arising in the future. So that is all the feedback that we have gotten from the community. And additionally, we have received feedback from some of the cities in Iowa who were in our initial research study that I presented 2 weeks ago. And so we have some more city comparisons that were done the past 2 weeks. So again, during this process of drafting this ordinance, staff looked at urban chicken ordinances in Iowa municipalities that shared similar characteristics to Indianola. And out of the 20 municipalities that staff looked at, 15 of them allowed for the keeping of urban chickens within city limits. So on the screen, you can see this chart showing 9 of the 15 cities who responded to me that I reached out to who allow urban chickens in their cities. And it shows those 9 cities who responded, their adoption date, how many current permits they have in their city, and then that relationship to the population size, just to create that ratio between the number of households who have chickens and then the total population of that city. And additionally, looking at those same 9 cities as the previous slide, staff also wanted to ask if they required permit applicants to notify neighboring properties, or if applicants were required to take a course/training on owning and caring for urban chickens before receiving a permit. As this chart shows, notifying neighboring properties is not a required thing by most of these cities, as only 2 of them require it. And requiring applicants to go through a required training is about 50-50 between these 9 cities. So out of the cities that have been mentioned in the presentation so far, only 2 of them have made recent amendments to their ordinances. I included this information to show specifically the notification amendment that Iowa City made, which is on the left. Iowa City used to require permit applicants to obtain permission from all neighboring properties to receive a permit, but the new amendment to this ordinance got rid of that requirement. And again, I just wanted to provide this information since I know that requiring applicants to notify neighbors was a large topic of conversation at the last meeting. And then on the screen, I have a few quotes that I received from the emails of the cities that responded back to me within the past 2 weeks. Many of which were positive and some of them were negative, or recommendations for what they wish their city would have done, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And again, some of those quotes are on the screen. While reaching out, we specifically asked what issues their cities have seen with the implementation of the urban chicken ordinance, and most of the responses said that they almost had no issues. The main issue that these cities faced was the occasional loose chicken who had escaped from their enclosure. Multiple cities actually expressed their surprise with the lack of complaints, as they were doubtful of the success of the ordinance when it was first introduced, but have reported very few issues and said that it has gone very well. And I do want to address the fourth quote on the screen, which talks about the noise complaints that the city of Osceola has received due to roosters. And this comment further backs Indianola's proposed ordinance's prohibition of roosters in the city, so that issues regarding roosters and their noise can be prevented in the future. Additionally, some of the cities that reached back out to us provided some recommendations that their city did or that they wish their city did. Those recommendations are on the screen. And I do want to point out the second bullet, which specifically talks about how to reduce odor. The city representative from Iowa City stated that mud is what causes strong odors, and if it stays wet, it is not good for the hens. So the ability to move the enclosure out of the mud or putting sand as the flooring for the chicken run could prevent odors and health issues. So far, talked about community feedback and the cities in Iowa and their feedback. I'm going to switch over to the feedback that we received 2 weeks ago at the last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting and how we have amended the ordinance to address those comments. So as of the last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on June 25th, there were 3 main amendments that the board requested. The first one is shown on this slide, and it is the addition of the permit requirement outlined in purple. This requirement states that the permit applicant must notify neighboring properties of their intent to obtain an urban chicken permit. This was added to the ordinance due to public comments and concerns made during the last Planning and Zoning Commission. The next amendment that was made was to further elaborate the feed storage regulation. Permit applicants must include plans for food storage in their permit application, and we have also added more detail to the feed and storage requirement in the section of the ordinance shown on the screen. And the final amendment that was made to the ordinance since the last meeting was the addition of a decommissioning procedure. In case that residents no longer want to continue with the permit application process or no longer want to keep urban chickens on their property anymore, they now must go through a decommissioning procedure. This procedure ensures that the chicken enclosure is dismantled and the site is restored appropriately so that there are no abandoned chicken facilities or chickens remaining on properties. And for the final 2 slides, I just want to go over 2 big topics that were handled in the last meeting. The first being code enforcement. All complaints will be received by both the code enforcement officer and the community service officer, and one of them will handle the complaint based off whether the complaint is a nuisance-based offense or if it is a negligence-based offense. The violation itself and the severity or the consistency of the violations and the judgment of the personnel handling the complaint will decide the course of action taken to resolve the issue. Permits may be revoked if the violation is not corrected within a reasonable amount of time, and the chickens and enclosure may need to be removed from the property. In case of extreme neglect or abuse, the permit can be revoked and the chickens and enclosure may be removed from the property. Partnerships with the Iowa Farm Sanctuary and potentially the ARL will aid in the permanent rehoming of chickens if removal is needed. And finally, a little more information on the permitting process. The permit requirements were talked about more in depth at the last Planning and Zoning meeting, but are shown again on the screen. The additions made to the permit requirements since the last meeting are highlighted. And the chart on the right further shows that having a permitting process is common among cities in Iowa that allow urban chickens within their city. The permits also ensure that people follow the regulations and requirements stated in the proposed ordinance, and it helps prevent nuisance issues that could occur. So that is why community development staff recommends that a permitting process should be required in this ordinance. So that is all the updates, amendments, and additional information that we have. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, of course.
Do I have anyone in the commission that has questions or comments about this item?
I noticed that. We went from approval to get you. Can you expand on why they made that update?
In his email, he didn't specifically state. I think it was to make the application less cumbersome to the people applying. He didn't state it specifically, but they made that a year ago, and they actually don't even need to notify the neighboring properties anymore. They just got rid of that completely from their permitting process.
My question elaborates on that, so you just notify with the intent to get the permit. If one of the neighboring adjacent properties has an issue with that, I assume that comes to staff and then hearing or so to staff at that point?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think from our standpoint, it's just to serve as a notification so people are aware. Really, the way the ordinance is written, there's no way that a neighboring property owner could stop it.
Yep.
It's just purely a notification.
Okay.
Sort of like a zoning change,
Yeah.
get notified, but
And yet different, the intent of it, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say but the zoning change, the notification is for them to come to a meeting like this.
Yeah,
and say,
right.
Voice their
"No, there-
concerns.
Yeah, there's no meeting where this is gonna be approved. This is proposed to all be approved administratively.
I guess then my only question would be would putting that in there, I mean, it just almost seems unnecessary because it might just cause more tension between neighbors, you know, I mean, they're gonna know that the chickens are there anyway, but if letting the neighbor know doesn't allow them any sort of
Record.
platform to say, hey, I don't agree with this, then.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Again, it was based off some feedback that we got at the last meeting. We wanted to at least put this in here. Ultimately, if the recommendation comes from you to approve it, but take that portion out, we can make that change. That's simple.
In the other 9 to 20 communities that you reached out to, did they give examples within their structure who did the monitoring?
A couple of them did. Some of them have specific animal control departments that took care of it. I know Des Moines, they do it through their police department and animal control, and some of it is through the community development staff. So it varied from city to city.
Any other
I have a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead, Lynn.
So I saw in one of the charts that it showed the cities for the number of chickens allowed per city. And I know it's sometimes somewhat on size of property. Do we have a maximum number allowed?
Yeah, so right now we're doing 1 chicken per 2,000 square feet of lot size. And then the absolute maximum, no matter how large the lot, as long as it's in a residential zoning district, would be 10 maximum.
Has it also been discussed, you know, if bird flu comes into effect or the animal dies, proper disposal and time of disposal?
We don't have anything specific on that, but it would be, I think, considered in the waste disposal section of the ordinance.
And so how about the eradication if there is bird flu?
I haven't looked much into bird flu. All of the ordinances that I've looked at haven't really addressed the bird flu. It's more of the responsibility of the owner.
I think there would probably be regulations from the State Department of Agriculture. I think they would need to be contacted, and I think they would give advice and perhaps rules to be followed.
I would imagine, I'd hate to assume, but I imagine that with you having X amount of permitted chicken residents or whatever, that if the state was, the health department would come down and probably reach out to you, say, hey, if you have any permitted chickens, you send us out to them. That would probably make sense.
And the other thing I would say too is if that did happen and you did have a deceased chicken on your property, there is a nuisance code that we have that also would kick in on some of that stuff too. I mean, presumably, and I've never personally raised chickens, but I would imagine there's a smell that comes with that and everything, and that's all covered within our nuisance code. So I do think that if that does happen, we still have regulations in effect that would apply to that are currently in place today. amongst all the other things that.
We don't have a big issue in the city of people like leaving a dead cat or dog.
Not that I'm aware of.
Right.
Yeah.
Just dead squirrels in the street.
I would think a chicken would be, like a fox would come up quickly
Yeah.
and take care of it for us.
Another question on the, again, of the 20 other communities, were there any constructability requirements that you saw in your research? Like, these are the minimum requirements of said structure in terms of constructability only?
Yeah, well, we had some on the size, and a lot of the other ordinances of cities had the similar requirements of size. None of them of like the constructability. That would be more of again, on the owners and making sure that their chickens are safe. And I'm guessing that the owners wouldn't want the structure to collapse on their chickens, so.
I noticed in a couple of the pictures, there's fence posts. Are there fence post guidelines presently on the books in the city of Indianola? And would that be a requirement for constructability? I wonder.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Sure, in a couple of the pictures,
Yeah.
there's fence and there's fence post.
Yeah.
And then if a person wanted to put a fence up in their yard today, is there a code requirement
Yeah,
for fence
I
with
mean,
depth and
boundary
diameter?
fences and stuff like that, but I think, yeah, it goes beyond even where the boundary is, so. I still think our current accessory building regulations really do govern a lot in here, but I think we've also expanded on them a little bit within the ordinance, just to kind of add a little bit of. Authority to them, for lack of a better term, so. I'm wrong on that, but I think that was kind of the intention that we had when we were writing that.
Would you be able to go back to the slide that had the similar sized communities?
Did you want the notification
The one
code?
prior, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think one thing that just struck me looking at this is it seems like a lot of infrastructure and trouble for very low adoption.
We did, I know, I believe it was Grinnell it was Oskaloosa who just recently had their ordinance adopted. They had a lot of support of this, and they had a lot of people reach out with interest on having chickens, but none of them have gone through the process since they implemented it.
Like the survey, the idea of it's more attractive than the actual work of it.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments from the commission? All right.
Yes, I have one more.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so with regard to the food storage of chickens and or chickens within themselves for the control of pests, thinking of coyotes, raccoons infiltrating the city. I know that we have a challenge right now with coyotes, and people post on Indianola Facebook with coyotes and their small pets, cats, dogs, whatever, and the safety, that creates safety for pets, neighbors, everything. Has there been a discussion about that?
I don't think we've quite discussed that. I know that we can't really control if they come into the city, but hopefully the enclosure requirements will help make sure that pests like that stay out of the chicken coops and enclosures in general. But that is definitely a good point.
And I want to add to that too, that, I mean, we do specifically have some regulations in there talk about like guards and stuff from chicken coops and whatnot. So reason that was put in is for those purposes, especially at night, if they're in a coop, that, a vent that is meant to provide air inflow into the coop is at least protected, so a predator can't get in through that vent. So we looked at some of that, but as Chris said, it's hard to completely control what's coming into the city in that sense, so.
You, Kristen. All right, at this time, I am gonna open the floor for public comment. If you would like to speak on this item, please step up to the podium and state your name and address. And if we could please try and keep our comments to 5 minutes or less.
My name is Nicole Duncan Lutheran, and I live in Indianola on North 17th Street. We should have partnered up with Kristen. I know my husband and I have done quite a bit of additional research since the last meeting. So he's passing out a little graph that we put together with what we found, and much of that is the same and aligns with what Kristen did. But we also specifically were asking about the number of noise-related complaints per year, the number of smell-related complaints per year, and loose chickens. And overwhelmingly, the folks that we talked to said there really aren't those concerns. Any of the noise-related complaints are typically roosters, which they don't allow. So, you know, the resident has to get rid of their rooster. They also, I think one of the cities actually had a noise complaint, but it turned out to be a parrot. So, you know, overwhelmingly, the resources that we were speaking to said, you know, it's been a great program. Didn't really like go gangbusters. You know, you can see with the per capita, you know, it's not like every other house in Indianola is going to have a chicken coop in their backyard. And I think we figured it out that using the data that we had based on population size and the number of permits, if we use that same math, you know, Indianola would be looking at roughly 15 or 16 homes having chickens. You know, once I think folks realize, okay, here are the rules we have to follow. Here's who's eligible and not eligible to do this. You know, folks think it's a good idea. Not everyone is going to want to do this. So I was really happy to see that additional research, but I also wanted to share just more of what we put together as well. Any questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a handout too.
Love it.
Here, I can just give it to me. I'll go.
Yeah, I also sent you a copy for the guy on the phone.
Oh, I will.
Okay. There you go. Sorry it takes time. Good.
We'll just-
Okay. Oh, wait, let me get mine. Got notes on it now. Okay. Oh, I've got the regs underneath there, so just pretend I have them in my hand. My name's Elodie Opstead and I live at 510 West Ashland, which is the part of original Indianola. So the lots are not excessive, okay? So tonight I'm speaking from a third draft amendment of my comments and thoughts because I've concluded this is pretty much a done deal. P&Z is making a decision while the survey continues, and it's on council's agenda 4 days after the survey ends. So this is a telling trajectory for me as a citizen. Therefore, while opposed, I need to focus on the issue at large, not on the issue at large, but on the particulars of the ordinance in hand, really over there, with the hope that you will pause for consideration on several points. My initial reaction is there are more regulations regarding planting a tree on the front easement rather than keeping livestock within city limits. Using the 2,000 square foot parameter in section 255.20, number 1, an original Indianola city lot of 80 by 150 permits six chickens. Laying 250 eggs per chicken per year. An online estimate, that's 1,500 eggs per year for 6 chickens, which is 125 dozen or 2.4 dozen per week. Personally, exceeding normal household use, increasing that footage to 4,000 aptly aligns with your intent and what we're seeing here online, which is household use and still providing a source of eggs and a connection with nature. So increasing the square footage still aligns you with your community goal. Point of clarification on number 4, it just seems that in section 1.4, where you define at large being inside, section 1.4 defines at large, but for 4.0 in 2.5520, it's considered inside corporate or city limits. This seems to contradict the 9 enclosure requirements, which indicates chickens will be contained, which I assume means they can't wander outside the coop or the run. So I just ask you to kind of look at that. I could be wrong because I'm not that bright. So 5G recently added, thank you very much. While applicants must notify all neighbors, obtaining approval, I believe, should be included in the ordinance language because it's required for purchasing an inert alley on a comparative scale. Keeping live urban chickens warrants requiring neighboring notification and approval. It was only declared and rid of Iowa City after considerable experience. So if neighbors do not provide approval, which means a permit cannot be issued, the applicant can request a hearing. Neighbors in the 0.7, neighbors in the 100-foot radius should be notified of renewals, penalties, notices of violations, etc. Since we are dealing with disease, smell, noise, and I'm thinking chickens talk continuously. There is noise, especially in a lot of my size. Also waste, ensuring that the neighborhood lends its voice and information to the process. 8, which corresponds to 0.8 on your ordinance, should a permit be denied and the applicant requests a hearing, neighbors within the 100-foot radius should be notified of the hearing, date and time, with an opportunity to speak or provide a letter or email. To obtain a permit, number 9, enclosure plans should be submitted with an initial application and also with annual renewals to be evaluated against criteria as well as neighbor experience. Once again, stricter criteria exists for where to plant a tree on a front easement and for purchasing alleys than this ordinance for bringing livestock inside city limits. Also, permit approvals should be obtained before installation of enclosures and purchase of livestock. Like building permits, work completed prior to obtaining an approved permit should be dismantled at owner expense. 10B, establishing chicken closures at the rear of the lot. A plan with dimensions should be submitted with the application for permit, which will be reviewed prior to placement of enclosure and livestock. Personally, I'm struggling with why churches, schools, businesses have a minimum 25-foot east setback and residents only 10-foot. Apply the same 25-foot to everyone. This lessens potential for the occurrences of number 13 and 14, noise, odor, waste, and general nuisance. Given experience over time after building and laying history, no pun intended, setbacks and number of barnyard fowl can be reviewed. We're not setting this in stone, so you might as well set it to appease the public. And 11B, there needs to be a waste setback. In the proposed ordinance, I did not see where that waste accumulation could be against a property line as long as it's covered and lidded. The setback for waste should be greater distance from neighboring properties than the chicken coop and run. Additionally, waste accumulation should be contained on level ground to avoid runoff into neighboring properties. Adding a general seepage runoff clause will contain this issue. 13 and 14. These sections address situation where there's a breakdown in, quote, think of others, be a good neighbor. Bringing and keeping livestock inside city limits warrants bringing the voice of neighbors into mention and consideration. While the city will make decisions regarding actions, revocations, etc., there needs to be opportunities for the neighbor's voice because with chickens, there is disease, odor, noise, waste, etc. Additionally, the process for taking action needs to include an expedient level clearly defined Unlike violations for not mowing a lawn or improperly parking RVs and campers, we are talking about disease, odor, noise, waste, backyard enjoyment, etc. Expedient actions regarding barnyard birds must include the option for an immediate shutdown with birds skedaddled safely off-site while processing takes place. Increasing the distance of a chicken confinement operation to 25 feet versus 10 from the property lines will eliminate many noise, loss of enjoyment, and odor issues. Again, after experience and history, ordinance language could be reviewed and changed, or can be reviewed and changed. I know these suggestions place increased burden on the city for the volume you anticipate. However, chickens will never stop talking, producing waste, and will always smell because they are livestock as defined by Indianola and Iowa code. They are not pets. I hope you will thoughtfully consider these changes, even if they alter your arc of trajectory. I would simply ask, think of others, be a good neighbor. Thank you for your time.
Do I have anyone else from the public that's here to speak on this item?
I just want to go real quick from what she has said. Chris Lutheran, 306 North 17th Street. We can see in our spreadsheet, I asked every single complaint officer in everyone, I think 17 communities, the number of complaints about the smell. There wasn't a single one. And about the noise, like I said, like my wife said, there's a few, but from roosters, and like even in Ames, there's no law that says you can't have a rooster, but the noise ordinance says you can't have a rooster. So they come and take away your rooster. And I know there's a lot of fear that Tyson's Foods is coming to your next door. But like I said, 4 to 6, 8 chickens is not gonna produce that much smell and noise to ruin the town. So like I said, just in, if you look at that spreadsheet, it just shows you, I asked every single one of them, how many complaints you get a year? How long have you been here? How long, who enforces it? Like in Oskaloosa, I think it's the fire department, the fire chief. He has so few calls that he doesn't even, he's like, I don't really do anything. So that's all I got.
Thank you. Do I have an opportunity for a response?
Oh,
I think we're just gonna refer it back to the commission at this point.
anybody
I
else?
just got a couple questions.
Oh,
That was all.
certainly, come on up.
I'm not debating nobody up here. Where are we at in the process?
Sorry, can I get your name and address?
John Hicks, north side of town. Where are we at in the process? Like, is it,
So we reviewed this at the last meeting and it's come back for review this meeting. So we
Okay.
are trying to make a decision tonight and then we'll refer it to council.
okay, that was my only question. And then, if it does pass and you said there's, it was code enforcement, who's checking up on that? And then are they checking that when we're at work? Are they checking that when somebody's home? How's that gonna go about? Or is there more discussion that takes place for that? Is my only question.
I mean, if we got a complaint in on something, we would check on it when we were able to check on it. Thinking out loud here a little bit, you know, if it is a complaint on a chicken that has, or a property owner that has a permit to have chickens, the issue we have with code enforcement is we can go out there, we can look at it, but we can't climb fences, we can't go
Okay.
into your private property, things like
Okay,
that. So
that was my
we
only.
might have to reach out to that permit holder and say, hey, we got a complaint, we
We
need to
need to
set up a
come take a
time to
look
get
at
out
it.
there, yeah.
Okay, cool. That was really my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone on the commission like to make a motion on this item?
I do want to make a comment.
Sure.
Particularly about 5G. And the idea that the neighbors ought to be able to decide whether or not you have chickens. What that really does, it would give someone else control of your property. And I think there have been Supreme Court cases about that, undertakings issues. Philosophically, I have a real problem with that.
Well, I think that, you know, we were saying that even though it states they have to let the neighbor know that there's, I mean, it doesn't stop that from happening. So
I think the
But she's-
intent is just to,
He's referring, he's
sorry.
referring to.
but on
Regs.
your G that you're
Oh,
referring to.
yeah, I'm
this one,
referring to
hers.
Elodie's
Okay, but-
comment about
Sorry about
having the neighbors have veto rights, quite
I
frankly.
didn't say that.
I
I did not say that. Read down below.
If neighbors provide
Do
approval.
not provide approval.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we recommend adoption of this ordinance to the city council, excluding 5G.
I still have a couple questions.
And if we get a second, there can still be discussion after the motion's on the table.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, if you have questions.
So on that same page, on page 15 of the document, at the top of the page, permit required, no person shall raise or keep chickens. What about the structures that are already in place right now within the city limits of Indianola? Are they just grandfathered in? Do they have to be brought up to compliance?
Really quick, what number are you on? 'Cause
Yeah, I'm on
looking at the
page
ordinance.
15.
What section is it? in?
Number 5 at the top. Section 2.
Urban chickens, part 5.
Permit required, no
Okay.
person shall raise and keep chickens within the city without a valid permit. There are chickens presently in the community. How do they get up to speed in terms of ordinance compliance?
So first of all, if in most areas in the city, if somebody does have chickens today, it's legal. The only time you can have chickens right now currently in the city is if you are on an A1 zone property, which really isn't much. So for the ones who currently have chickens, it's illegal. They still have to follow this one that aren't supposed to have them. For the ones that are allowed to have them and may still have them at that point, anything would be grandfathered in as part of what they would have to do to this. Grandfathering does get a little bit tricky sometimes. If you're adding it onto a coop or if you're changing the chicken run or something like this, that grandfathering clause can go away. So there are ways that we could still make them come into compliance, depending on what changes from modern day to then.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have another question too?
On that same page, with regards to letter G on bullet point 5, applicant must provide notice to residents of an adjacent property located within 100-foot radius. What happens if your property is bigger than 100 foot?
We would still have to, whatever the boundaries of the property are, it's.
So is the property corners? So it would be actually the corner. When you say radius, I'm thinking a center point somewhere, I guess. So-
Yeah, it would be measured from the outside boundaries.
Got it.
Anyone else have any questions? Can we get a roll call vote?
Harris,
Yes.
Stecker,
Ben?
You say it again, did you say Stecker?
Yes.
Stecker, yes.
No.
Weiss,
Yes.
Mormon,
Yes.
Darling,
Yes.
Nate,
No.
and Piper.
No.
So just so from background, anybody who's watching on there, we have scheduled a public hearing for the city council on July 29th. That is a Monday. It's fifth Monday of the month. Typically, we have meetings on the first and third, but this one got pushed back to the fifth just because there was a conflict on the first meeting of August. So July 29th at 6 p.m. will be the public hearing for council.
All right, we'll move on to item 7A under new business, Twin Creeks final plat. Item number 1, consider request from Chad Daniels for final plat approval of the Twin Creeks subdivision.
this request, the presentation will go over both the final plat and the rezoning request, for 7A1 and 7A2. Going over the background, Daniels has submitted on behalf of Don and Cynthia Stouch a final plat application and a rezoning application for those parcels listed above. The request shows 5 developable lots for single-family residential development and would create 3 outlots reserved for future development and division. The request also proposes a rezoning from A1 agricultural open space to R1 and R2 single-family residential attached zoning. This shows the proposed final plat that was submitted to staff. The proposal shows 5 developable lots for residential development. 3 outlots are also shown, and those would be reserved for future development. So if those were ever to be developed in the future, they'll have to come back to PMZ and City Council to develop those outlots. Lots 1 through 5 are proposed to be rezoned to the R1 single family residential detached zoning district, and then outlots X, Y, Z are proposed to be rezoned for the R2 single family residential attached. On the left, we have the future land use map, and the right shows the current zoning of the subject property. The future land use map, there is an error on the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, as we noticed this, the comprehensive plan, obviously, when we adopted this, was meant to adopt parks and recreation ground for golf courses. And as this shows as a giant park, almost a 60-acre park, which you would probably never do. Our assumption was, for whatever reason, when the map got produced, that this was thought that this was part of the golf course, and it's not. So anyways, looking at the other surrounding land uses, we feel that it should be matching up with that community mixed use. So that's the determination that we've made.
Going on that, so with that, the future land use map does guide for medium and high density residential, which calls up to 25 dwelling units per gross acre in this area. If the request were to be approved, lots 1 through 5 would be approved for single family detached style dwellings, ranging in 1.29 acres to 2.90 acres in size. The remaining outlots would be required to, in further platting, to match that density goal that's outlined in the comprehensive plan. Then, as can be seen on the right, the area is currently zoned for the A1 agricultural zoning district. So for the first request, this goes over the final plat. Staff is recommending approval of the request with conditions. Those conditions being that should outlots X, Y, and Z be further developed, residential density shall take into account the meets and bounds of the Twin Creeks final plat to achieve density goals identified in the comp plan. And then for the rezoning request, staff is recommending approval as submitted. If there's any questions. Any questions for staff?
Could you go back to the map of the plat, please? There, whoop. The other one first, the one you just went by, that one. Having a hard time understanding.
Boundaries as it shows on the aerial map.
Well, no, the area, the map, the boundaries shown here don't jive with the boundaries on the plat, do they?
So go.
See that,
go back, yep, I know, and I know exactly what we're talking about. If you go back to the plat,
Yeah.
so if you can.
Next, the one back there.
So what it does on a lot of these is it calls out those distances on the bottom between kind of what would be the southern boundary of the plat, in the bottom of that property line. It looks like it's a small distance, but if you actually look at the number on the plat, it's a bigger distance. So it's not scaled out on here 100%, and that's just so we could get it fit on the plat that's provided. So, but if you look at the actual call outs on the distance numbers, they do match up.
Okay, optical illusion, I guess. So there's a trade-off then here. You can have some big lots if you promise to make the rest
Yeah,
more dense house.
so if you go.
Is that what
Go back
this
to the
is?
aerial photo really quick. So we've been working with the property owner on this one for a while. And initially our thought was on this, if you look kind of where that draw comes up, it's drainage area for stormwater. Our comp plan does say that we don't want to have any major stream crossings on any of these waterways. We want to try to limit those. So knowing that, there's probably never going to be any connectivity between the southern portion of those grounds and those lots right there. So our thought was maybe this area does lend itself to some larger residential lot sizes in comparison to what you normally see in an urban environment. Noting that, yes, we feel that then the rest of the ground should try to balance out that density requirement a little bit and get some smaller lot sizes on that.
So X, Y, and Z
Yeah.
should be denser development
Yes.
than these 5
Yes,
lots.
and if you put it all together, that density should get closer to our 2 to 5 units per acre, right? Yeah.
Okay, how does that get recorded and how does it get enforced 10 years from now,
Sure,
15
so-
years from now?
So it'll be a condition on this one. We can mark it kind of on some internal documents as that goes, but still, hopefully whoever's reviewing that in the future will catch those on there and make sure that that takes place. Or I can call the person who is in this position in the future and remind them. I mean, and I joke about it, but really.
Collect call from
yeah,
Independence, Missouri.
I joke about it, but honestly, we're doing everything we can do to get it documented and shown on there. We can make notes on a map or something like that. But sometimes it does become difficult to assure that that does get enforced in future years.
Yeah. Thank you.
Or you could stay on the commission. For a long time.
Do you have any other questions from the commission? Do we have anyone in the audience that's here to speak on this item?
Good evening. My name is Don Strauch and my wife Cindy and I own the property. And I want to begin by thanking the city staff and Council Member Richardson for their work with us on this proposal. And there were some bumps along the way because we started it back in January or February. But I think we've worked through virtually all of those with one exception, and that's our request for a waiver on the setback requirement. That at this time is the only issue that remains. I thought I had met the requirement to submit to your group the waiver request, but I understand that it needed to be very formal on a letterhead. I got that notice just a week or so ago. I did then write the letter of waiver request, but I understand that it was too late to have included in your packet. So I don't know where to go from here with the request for the waiver. I didn't bring enough copies, but I have about 6 copies of the request for waiver. It's only 1 page on the setback. Do I just leave 1 copy and you make some? I don't know.
We can get it to them for now and one of them can share and then we've got it obviously in the email, so.
What's the issue?
I'll share.
So essentially, there is currently a 40-foot easement to the city and for utilities and for the road. And we would like to have that maintained through this process and through a vote of approval. And there's various reasons. I've tried to capsulize those in the request for waiver. And I understand that the city's future hope of improving Hoover Street. We are entirely in supportive of that. And, but it looks like it's far down the road. We're told early is probably 10 years. So my question is, and my concern is that, that the requirement seems to be that it needs to be a 50-foot and not an easement, but a right of way, which means that we deed that 50 feet to the city. And, you know, a mild protest on our part is that you're claiming you're claiming all 50 feet as ownership, when right now you don't have ownership, you have easement. And I doubt that there's ever too many circumstances where that's an issue. I know there was on K Street, but this is an entirely different ballgame. Nobody else, to my knowledge, along Hoover Street has a 50-foot right-of-way deeded to the city. So we would be the first one. We go on record as saying that if the city ever expands Hoover Street, we would be happy to not only agree to that, but do so via a deed restriction or whatever the terminology is now, so that the city wouldn't have to go through some kind of legal challenge. You would have a right to come to us to tell us that you now need that 50-foot. We may not even be the owners then, but whoever the owner is, because of a deed restriction, it would pass on, and you would be able to claim your 50 feet. Whether the other part of that is the 50 feet easement, or is it a right of way? Because if it's an easement, then the owner owns the property. If it's a right of way, then it's deeded to the city. So I'm here simply to request a waiver of the requirement that was explained to us, and that we respectfully disagree with, and hope that that the council, that commission, and then the council would approve our request for a waiver. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question. Because I have Horace Timber Ridge marketed on the corner of Hoover and 110th Avenue, and they had a similar that they had to do in order to comply on Hoover Street as well, correct?
Yep. And that one was a little different because that one was outside of city limits, so it was within 2 miles of the city, but outside of city limits. So working with Warren County on that particular one, the county, and this piece of ground probably used to be in the county, doesn't prefer to have it by fee title. So we maintain an easement on that with the requirements. You know, the easement was the width that we require for that. But again, the city in our code requires that this right of way be deeded for fee title, or as fee title, I should say. So city just has different requirements than the county.
But in preparation for the same assumption for the
Yep, so if we
future.
ever did annex it, then it is available at that point, and then we can grab it.
Do you have any other questions?
And I just want to clarify, so going back, and Don was 100% right, we've had a lot of conversations about this and the right-of-way requirement of the 40 and 50 feet. From our standpoint, we provided the information on if you don't want to deed the 50 feet as required by the code, or these are the processes that you have to go through. I think there might have just been some confusion, but ultimately the survey that was submitted to us showed the 50 feet with a note that it was going to be deeded over to the city. And then last week is kind of when we had some more conversations at that point. We understood that Don wanted to continue with the waiver. However, just want to note that the survey that was submitted and the survey that was ultimately reviewed by staff does show the 50 feet. So it would take a new survey and all of that stuff if the waiver were to be ultimately approved.
May I make another comment or not?
Can I just have you step back up here?
Again, I want to thank the city staff and Councilmember Richardson for their help. We did submit a original plat with a 40-foot easement. And then they had their time to make their comments, and they did. And we adjusted it and resubmitted for the 50-foot in order to get the process moving. But I wove into that time working on that I would be making a request for a waiver. So I felt kind of stuck. I submitted the 40-foot easement plat, and staff made their recommendations, and it really looked like it couldn't go forward until I did the 50-foot. So then I had the surveyor come out and we resubmitted it, and it's the 50-foot. So it never was our desire ever to go with a 50-foot. We did that in order to push the process forward. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here and you wouldn't have it on your agenda. So, you know, it's a little muddled there. We did submit the proper 40-foot one, I think in March, and here we are in July. I resubmitted, or the surveyor resubmitted probably April or May for the 50 feet, but also as a right-of-way. I understand that even if you go with the 50-foot, you could make it an easement. That would be our second alternative. But our first alternative, very, very clear, is that we stay with a 40-foot easement, be consistent with 3 or 4 miles of property that the city and the county own on Hoover Street, and keep it at 40-foot. Acknowledge that the city wants to, in the future, improve Hoover Street. And the neighbors that I've come to know and love want the same thing. So I don't think you're going to have any problem with that kind of improvement moving forward. Take the extra 10 feet then at that time. Thank you for hearing me again.
Thank you. Do we have anyone that would like to make a motion on this item?
And no, I'd like a little more clarification on what our options are here. And if you were to do what Mr. Strach, I'm hoping I pronounce that. How would you do that? To say, well, leave it at 40 feet, but when you expand the road, then it's got to go to 50, because that may be in the future, and then you've got 5 landowners to deal along there with those lots instead of 1 person. And so would you put a restriction on their deed? Would he do that?
That would have to be privately done, yeah, we can't do that.
You would have to put a restriction on the deeds of all of those properties. Say that when the city expands or decides to improve or pave or whatever the plan is, then those folks will be surprised, you lost 10 feet of your lawn. I'm afraid that's what it would come to.
Yeah, I mean, and it is an option. But there's a reason that our code says that you have to deed it as part of a plotting process, because from the city standpoint, we don't want to have to go through that process to do that, because I'm not an attorney. I don't want to pretend to be an attorney in that sense, but I would assume there could be challenges with that all along, and you know, getting the language exactly right to say, you know, at that time, you need to dedicate it for no fee, you know, who pays for those legal fees and all that stuff. I've been doing this long enough to know that doing it as part of a plotting process is just the cleanest way to do it. I understand the concern from the property owner, but again, that is why the city's code says what it does.
So according to the code, then it's either deed it or don't plat it.
Well, that's Yeah, I mean, the code says that, but again, there is waivers that can be issued, and that's what Don is asking. So our code does specifically state that right away needs to be dedicated and deeded to the city. He's asking for a waiver from that requirement, also a waiver from the 50 feet at this point in time. Our code also says that it will be a future arterial road, and that needs to be 100 feet of right of way, which is 50 feet from each center line of the road. So that's where we're getting the 50 feet. Right now, it's currently 80 feet, so 40 feet from the center line.
Having come from a city that was growing rapidly, the acquisition of right of way is always essential, especially when it's on the master plan, and then this is going to be an arterial road in the future. And the issue and concern that you have is that you set precedent. So if you make a waiver for one, you make a waiver for all, or if you hold steady for one, you hold steady for all. And that sets you up very well for the future. Because at some point, some future deputy city manager, community development director, city manager will have to go and acquire that property. And even if there's waivers and things like that, there will be surveys, there will be attorneys involved, there will be costs involved in all of that. And that becomes a very challenging issue. And that's what takes a K Street project from a very slow moving project to design and trying to do land acquisitions and all that type of thing, and makes it stretch out for a very long period of time and increases costs. And so a case by case basis as property becomes available is the very best approach to ensure that not only are you acquiring the right of way you need, but you are also providing the essence of transparency to the future property owners, Don, to yourself and to anyone or future owners. In all reality, you still have the enjoyment of the land, but you're not paying the property taxes on that, which is a good thing. But as that property transitions from person to person, it's very clear the intent of the city and its practices and precedents that it sets with whatever future property owners you have as they continue to develop those properties as well. And the expectation is clear and not arbitrary and capricious.
Sort of like requiring the building of a sidewalk when there's nothing at the end of the sidewalk, but you have to build it because something's going to come at the end of it sometime.
Exactly.
I'll have one clarification too. So based off of his comments and Charles' comments, so it sounds like they provided a survey, plot design with the 40-foot easement, and then due to the code requirement, updated that survey to the 50-foot, to push it through. So, it's pushed through, now we're gonna be setting back basically, because if they want to do it, then, it's here now because it wants to do it, I would assume. So if it's not to go through, then it's gonna be delayed even more. It'll be a new survey, all new resubmittals.
And there's a few things that would have to happen, and it really depends on how the commission would handle that request. Now, you could recommend it with the waiver request, at which point we would then have to delay it going to city council until we got the updated survey, because ultimately the city council has to tie a plat approval to a resolution, and it has to be a plat that's submitted. So we would need something updated to reflect what your recommendation is at that point. But then we probably have to do a little bit of an internal review too, just to make sure everything else that we initially reviewed is still accurate and nothing else needs to be changed. So yeah, likely it would probably cause a little bit of a delay. I don't know how much of a delay. I think at this point, we reviewed this one quite a bit, so we're pretty familiar with it. I think the review would probably go pretty fast on any change, but still there would probably be a little bit of a delay in the process.
I totally understand from the point of view when someone's owned land on Hoover Street for many, many years going, well, it's kind of silly, what that is. Yeah, it is part of our comprehensive plan, what the plan is for the future. And I guess just avoiding the city isn't taking anything. This is part of the process of changing a plat or applying for a plat. So I think it makes sense as as our code is written.
Would anyone like to make a motion on?
I'll make a motion to approve as submitted.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Any other discussion really quick? Just to make sure there's no
Yes.
more of that.
Val?
Clarification. I'm a little confused by what's offered here, but so the staff recommendation is that it be approved as submitted, or the city recommends that the request be approved with conditions. What conditions would those be?
There's two requests. It's not just a final
Right,
plat.
there's
Yep.
two requests.
So the first item is the final
you.
plat. That is where we are recommending approval with conditions. That condition again is should outlaw X, Y, Z be further developed, residential density must be taken into account as according to the comp plan. The second item is for the rezoning request that's put on the plat, and we're recommending approval for that one.
So
to
these
clarify,
should be two separate.
It has to be two motions. So the motion by Jake, second by Misty, that was for
That's for that has to do with
the subdivision plat. Right?
that's the one with the green. We're approving to change that comprehensive plan of the rezoning, is that correct?
No, just there's the plat. So go back. So the plat is one more. This document right here, that's the plat. So the motion, this is the one where we're recommending approval with the condition that the rest of the land be taken into account. And then after that is the changing of the zoning map.
So this would be on item A1.
It can be part of your recommendation, but it's not recommended as submitted. With the condition would be the plat that we have submitted. If you want to further expand on that, it would have to be a condition.
Just clarification, that, which one is that? Is that a part of this one?
Yes,
1A.
yes.
So it would
So
have the conditions on it.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do here, just so we make sure we don't have any confusion, is to withdraw the motion, withdraw the second, and start over again.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay, so would anyone like to make a motion on A1?
I'm leaving it open in case somebody has.
I'll make a motion that we recommend the request to be approved with conditions in regards to outlaw X, Y, and Z. Should they be further developed, residential density shall take into account the metes and bounds of the Twin Creeks final plat to achieve density goals identified in the Elevate Indianola Comprehensive Plan.
Someone like to second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Maybe get a roll call.
Piper,
Yes.
Nate,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
Tucker,
Yes.
Darling,
Yes.
Barris,
Yes.
Mormon.
Yes. All right, and now would anyone like to make a motion on item A2?
Oh, I would like to move that we recommend that the request be approved as submitted.
Al, would anyone like to second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Darling,
Yes.
Barris,
Yes.
Mormon,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
Tucker,
Yes.
Nate,
Yes.
Piper.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 7B. Consider approval of a plat of survey request for Chad Daniels for Lot 3 of the Indianola Industrial Park Plat 3.
So Chad Daniels is, on the behalf of Indianola Industrial Park LLC, is requesting approval of a plat of survey for property address at 1604 East Orchard Place. The split would result in parcel A 4.05 acre lot developable for an industrial type use allowable in the M2 zoning district. An active site plan application is currently in review by city staff for this site, proposing industrial manufacturing, production, et cetera, as it relates to an erosion control business. This shows the proposed plat of survey. Again, proposing parcel A of 4.05 acre lot developable for industrial development, be considered a corner lot with frontage along East Orchard Place and frontage along North 17th Street. And this shows the comprehensive plan, which designates it as future industrial, and then the outline of the subject area on the right is currently zoned for the M2 General Industrial Zoning District. Staff is recommending approval of this request as was submitted. And if there's any questions or comments for staff.
Do we have any questions on this item? Do you have anyone in the audience that's here to speak on this item? Would anyone like to make a motion on item 7B?
Approve this.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Ferris?
Yeah.
Arlen?
Yes.
Decker?
Yes.
Weiss?
Yes.
Nate? Piper?
Yes.
All right, we'll move on to item 7C, consider waiving right to review of a plat of survey for Chad Daniels for a property located within 2 miles of the city of Indianola.
So this request is located outside of city limits. It's on the west side of town. We don't have slides for this one just because we don't typically do them for those types of requests. Staff is recommending approving waiver request as submitted.
And I will just make one comment really quick. This is the last time you'll probably ever review a waiver request like this since we changed the subdivision code, and that's going to be in effect here pretty quick. So Ron and I were pretty excited about that today.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Can I have you come up to the podium and just state your name and address?
Chad Daniels, 22470 18th Lane, New Virginia. What is the new waiver?
So it's all approved administratively essentially, so you don't have
The way
to go
it
through this
used to be.
process. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're unhappy about that, aren't you?
Well, it just adds time that is
I
pointless.
know.
It wastes your time, it wastes them time. It used to be,
They've been saying that for months now. So.
yeah, just, they're no brainers, stamp them, turn them around and, yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anyone else in the audience here to speak on this item?
One comment. Chris Jacob, property owner. Just want to say my wife and I are excited to move to the community. And the main drive for the split is the bank wants the ag operation separate from the primary residence. That's all I have.
Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion on this item?
Make a motion to approve as submitted.
Would anyone like to second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Arlen? Yes. Marmon?
Yes.
Ferris?
Yeah.
Piper?
Yes.
Decker?
Yes.
Weiss?
Yes.
Nate?
Right, and then we'll move on to item 7D, consideration and adoption of building design alternative.
So this is a proposed code update to potentially allow for additional flexibility and grant relief from strict compliance with our current building design requirements that are outlined in chapter 16509, titled Building Design Standards as part of the site plan review process. The intent of the code is to maximize aesthetics and diversity of building design within the city of Indianola while remaining consistent with the general intent and the purpose of the zoning code, comprehensive plan, and any other long-term or visioning plans that we adopt as the city. So there are 3 proposed design alternatives that applicants could request as part of the proposed ordinance. It's not quite like a variance request because it wouldn't go through the Board of Adjustment, but it would allow them to go away from the requirement given that given certain regulations and requirements that they need to meet within the code. So the three different proposed design alternatives that they could consider as part of their site planning process is one, design alternatives to any numerical regulation established in 165.097 when the proposed design alternative does not exceed a reduction of more than 50% to a minimum design requirement. This essentially talks on the minimum requirements for class 1, class 2, class 3, and 4 requirements, or the minimum 20% or 30% clear glass requirement for the first floor of a building. The second requirement or alternative talks about going away from a numerical regulation established in 165.09.7 when the proposed design alternative does not exceed it, or an increase of more than 50% to a maximum building design requirement. So this essentially talks to the, for some building types, they have to have like a variation in their wall plane. So if they go over like 60 foot of like flat wall, then they have to have a recession or a column or something. So that way it doesn't like, so give it more depth and dimension. And then the third design alternative is to the requirement of permanent materials for collection containers when the siting of the collection container is not visible from the public street or residentially developed zone properties, and when collection container consists of no more than 2 totes. So that doesn't go over like dumpsters if the site requires that. And this mostly applies to smaller developments like office type use that don't really generate as much waste as a food establishment. The code does outline a procedure. So the first one, the first step in the process would be for staff review. As part of their site planning process, they would submit a application for a design alternative to be considered. We would review the request with intent and regulations of the zoning code, and then any applicable long-term planning policies that's adopted by the city. That would then go to the Planning and Zoning Commission to hear both that site plan and the design alternative. They can, or you guys as the board, you can recommend approval, denial, approval conditions, or remand the request back to the applicant for any modifications or adjustments to that request. And then the last step would be to go to City Council. So any recommendations that are made here with Planning and Zoning would be forwarded onto them for their review and final decision. When deliberating the request, there are 4 items that could be considered as part of the request. The first just goes over the consistency and compatibility with future land use map, comprehensive plan, and any other adopted and applicable long-term planning policies. So that would be the comp plan, the 6th Street sub area, or the downtown design guidelines. Those are all items that could be considered. The second talks about surrounding land uses, building sizes, architectural style, building types and function, building placement, orientation, and setbacks. And this is just to ensure that that the proposed design alternative is context appropriate. So for example, if a design alternative was proposed in the downtown square with a downtown design guidelines guide for maximizing clear glass on the first floor, and neighboring properties are maximizing on glass, then it might not be contextually appropriate for a property to have less glass requirements than if other properties are meeting that. The third is considering the general relationship to an impact on the surrounding area and neighboring properties. And then the last one is provisions to decrease or minimize architectural impacts, such as implementation of additional landscaping or screening, exceeding minimum required class 1 or class 2 building materials on primary facades, or exceeding minimum glass requirements to primary facades. So in some cases, they might have multiple primary facades just because of orientation of their building. So if they're maximizing their facade requirements there versus another primary facade that might not, I mean, it's primary by code, but it doesn't take like the full it's not like the main focus of the building, right? Like it's not your main customer entrance, that could be considered as part of the request as well. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the proposed ordinance. If there's any questions.
Do you have any questions on this item?
Not too long ago, we had to change some things to comply with Iowa code changes. Is that a part of this, or is this in compliance? Because I thought they wanted kind of plain flunts on everything.
Well, Iowa code changed
Is
residential.
that just on
standards. Yeah, it
residential?
just changed
That was
residential
resident.
standards. So,
Okay,
yeah,
never
this
mind.
doesn't apply to that.
Other questions?
I have a word clarification. What is a special overlay district?
That would be, we don't have one currently at the city, but if ever the city were to adopt a special overlay district, so for other communities, they adopt a highway corridor district, which is an overlay with your C2 district, which would have additional design guidelines just based off of how close those properties are to the highway. So the language, even though we don't have that right now, the language is included in case the city ever considered that or adopted one.
Thank you.
You might have it on
What that was.
hillside developments with large steep bridges that would make it so that you might have urban fire areas that could be generated. So you might have an overlay along a foothill.
Okay, thank you. I never heard that term.
Would anyone like to make a motion on this item?
Yes, I move, we recommend approval to the city council as this has been presented.
I'd like to second.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Ferris,
Yes.
Mormon,
Yes.
Decker,
Yes.
Darling,
Yes.
Nate, Weiss,
Yes.
Piper.
Yes.
Item 8A, building permit report.
Yeah, just checking in, so this is June 2024 report, so we're halfway through the calendar year. So kind of that 50% mark, so was a good point to just look at where we're at. So I think we're in line pretty much everywhere. We're at 78 total permits right now. So if that plays out, we're gonna be closer to 160, which is kind of where we've been the last few years. And we're at 25 single family dwellings, 27 total units because we have one duplex in there. So again, if that plays out, we're gonna be close to 60 new residential units coming into the city. And again, that's on pace with where we've been the last couple of years. The only number that stands out that is much higher than usual is the 81 million in valuation. But again, I've made this known as most of that is the high school renovation that's going on right now. So that's gonna be a little bit of an outlier in future years when we look at 2024, but it's so good that we're getting that level of development there, so.
Build a new city hall, build a new library. That'll make up for it.
There we go. We'll just keep building all these new buildings. And then on current developments, we're still kind of in the same place we've been on a lot of these. I know some of the bigger ones, the Deer Run, the Emerald Bays and things like that. Deer Run, we're still waiting to get some more information on that before any of the plating comes back to the commission. So hopefully that'll happen. And then if anybody's kept an eye out as you've been driving through town, a lot of these bigger development projects that we reviewed back in the winter have broken ground and are making some good headway. So any questions on any of that? Last thing I will say is this is my last meeting with you as it is my last week here, and appreciate everything that you guys have done. I know 2 of you have been on the commission since I've been here. And Courtney actually worked for me for a little bit. So and the rest of you, it's just been great working with you. Appreciate your insight and deliberation and all of this stuff. And we'll miss you, but hopefully I can still keep in touch with some of you. So but thank you.
Miss you too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charlie. You've done good things here.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
I couldn't have done it without you guys though, so, and everybody else, my staff and everything, and through the years has been great, city managers, citywide, everybody's doing a really good job on all that stuff, so.
You'll give us a
I'm just
great
a piece of it.
recommendation?
Yes. Anytime you need it.
Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second that.
thank you. Meeting adjourned.